Someone lays a sheet across my...
There's a particular quality to a song you weren't supposed to hear. You knew it the moment you caught the opening notes through a door someone forgot to close, or in the back seat of an older cousin's car, or on a radio left playing in a room where no adult had thought to check. The 1970s ran on that feeling, and it wasn't just the usual suspects, not just underground albums or midnight radio. Some of the most carefully censored music of that decade came gift-wrapped as ordinary pop, songs with big charts behind them and cheerful melodies in front of them. Songs that parents let into the house before they read the lyrics. What kept these tracks off certain stations, out of certain schools, and away from certain dinner tables wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was a single phrase, sometimes it was a sound, sometimes it was a political nerve the song pressed without warning. What follows are 15 of those songs, the ones that adults wanted to manage, the ones that children found anyway. By 1970, Vice President Spiro Agnew had decided that rock music was a public health problem, not a metaphor. He said it plainly in speeches, naming artists he considered subversives. He pushed the FCC to lean on radio programmers. Programmers responded by quietly pulling records that seemed to fit his description. Brewer and Shipley had recorded a gospel-inflected folk track called One Toke Over the Line. The word toke was right there in the title. There was no ambiguity, no need for interpretation. The song was an open, cheerful acknowledgement of getting high, and it had already climbed into the top 20 of the Billboard Hot 100 when Agnew singled the duo out as subversives. Some stations dropped it, others continued playing it.
I'm waiting for the train that goes home, sweet babe.
What no one in Washington appeared to notice was that Lawrence Welk, whose television variety show was among the most wholesome programs on American television, had already performed the song on air. Welk introduced it to his audience as a modern spiritual. His cast sang it straight. No one on the production team caught the reference. Or if they did, no one said anything. The song that the Nixon administration was trying to quarantine had been broadcast without incident to millions of living rooms on a Saturday night. The Illinois Crime Commission published a list in 1970. They called it a guide to drug-oriented rock. The idea was that certain songs, if identified and flagged, could be kept away from young listeners who might otherwise absorb their messages without understanding them. The list included White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane. It included Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles. It included 8 Miles High by the Byrds. It even included Puff the Magic Dragon, a song its writer had spent years explaining was simply about childhood imagination. But not everything that worried programmers in the early 1970s had anything to do with drugs. Bloodrock was a Texas rock band that had very little in common with Jefferson Airplane. Their 1971 single, D.O.A., wasn't coded. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a first-person account of dying in the aftermath of a plane crash. The narrator describes his injuries. He describes the person beside him. He describes the moment of understanding that he will not survive. Radio stations across the country refused to play it. The reason given wasn't drugs. It was psychological harm. Programmers said the song was too disturbing for regular rotation. Band members later recalled that drivers were pulling over on highways because the ambulance sirens embedded in the recording made them think an emergency vehicle was approaching. It still reached number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100. People were finding it regardless. Some songs were kept off the air for what they said. Some were kept off the air for what they sounded like. Serge Gainsbourg and Jane Birkin recorded Je t'aime moi non plus in 1969, and by the early 1970s, it had reached American shores with its reputation already established. The BBC had banned it before it crossed the Atlantic. The Vatican had issued a formal condemnation. In Italy, the label head who released it was reportedly excommunicated. The song had no profanity. Its lyrical content was suggestive, but not explicit. What it had were sounds, breathing and sighs, recorded closely and deliberately, arranged so that the song subject was unmistakable regardless of the listener's knowledge of French. The Italian single came in a plain white sleeve, no artwork, stamped with the words meaning forbidden to those under 21. The packaging itself was a form of advertisement. A plain white sleeve with a warning was more interesting to a teenager than any cover design could have been. The bands had done something no marketing budget could have replicated. They had placed this particular record in a category of things adults specifically did not want young people to access, which is the category most reliably sought out by young people. A song condemned by the Pope wasn't a warning, it was a recommendation. Ohio by Crosby, Stills. Nash and Young was recorded in May of 1970, within days of the National Guard shooting at Kent State University. 4 students had died. Neil Young wrote the song almost immediately. The band recorded it. It was pressed and distributed within weeks. The lyrics named Nixon directly. They named the 10 soldiers. They named the 4 dead in Ohio. There was no artistic distance between the song and the event it described. Some radio stations, particularly in markets with conservative ownership or strong pro-administration sentiment, refused to add it. The concern wasn't obscenity. It was the song's function as a news broadcast set to music, something too current and too accusatory to sit comfortably in a pop rotation. It became a generational document anyway. The bands in those specific markets made it feel more urgent, not less. Students who heard it understood that the attempt to keep it quiet was itself part of what the song was about. The song later resurfaced on a second list. After September 11, 2001, a Clear Channel internal memo circulated among radio stations suggesting tracks that were lyrically questionable for airplay. Ohio was on it. A song censored in 1970 for accusing a president had to be managed again 30 years later for different reasons, suggesting the same unease had simply found a new occasion.
Black day in July.
Gordon Lightfoot had written Black Day in July in 1968, following the Detroit riots of the previous year. The song described what happened with unusual specificity. It named the city. It described the fires. It described the racial dimension of the conflict without softening it into abstraction. The song received almost no major market radio play in the United States. It wasn't that the facts were wrong, it was that the facts were too direct. Lightfoot spoke publicly about what happened to the song. He said programmers were sidelining it to avoid controversy.
Motor City madness has touched the country.
He was correct, and the outcome was that a straightforward account of a documented American event was treated as a kind of hazard. The song continued to be performed. It appeared on his albums. But the radio silence throughout the 70s and beyond kept most American listeners from hearing it at all. A quiet erasure of something that had actually happened, conducted not by officials, but by individual program directors, making individual decisions about what their audiences needed to hear. Sylvia Robinson recorded Pillow Talk in 1973. She would later co-found Sugar Hill Records and produce Rapper's Delight, one of the first hip-hop records to reach mainstream radio. In 1973, she was a soul singer, working in a Newark studio, and she recorded a song that many stations refused to play in daylight hours. Pillow Talk wasn't the first song to suggest intimacy through sound rather than language, but it pushed the format in ways that made programmers nervous. The moans were deliberate. The pacing was slow. The vocal performance was designed to carry the song's meaning without relying on its words. Many stations moved it to late night. Some refused it outright. The ones that played it during normal hours occasionally received complaints from listener groups who described it as unsuitable for family radio. It reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Whatever restrictions programmers placed on it did not keep listeners from the record stores. The song also set a template. Without Pillow Talk establishing what soul radio could absorb, the records that followed it into that sonic space would have landed in a colder climate.
Timothy,
The Buoys were a Pennsylvania rock band, and in 1970, their manager gave them a song written by Rupert Holmes. Holmes was a professional songwriter who had constructed the song as a deliberate provocation. He said so later. He wanted to write something so controversial that it would guarantee airplay through shock value alone. Timothy tells the story of a mine cave-in. 3 men are trapped, 2 survive. The song ends before the 3rd man is accounted for. The implication, for anyone paying attention, was clear. The survivors had eaten the missing man. When radio stations figured out what the song was about, many of them banned it. At that point, the band was instructed to tell interviewers that Timothy was a mule, not a person. A mule that had been, presumably, consumed. This explanation satisfied some programmers. Others continued refusing to air it, regardless of the species involved. The song reached number 17 on the Hot 100. The controversy did exactly what Holmes had intended. He went on to write Escape, also known as the Pina Colada song, which had no such complications.
Oh, unborn child.
Seals and Crofts had built an audience on soft, melodic pop. Summer Breeze was one of the decade's more pleasant records. Their label, Warner Brothers, had grown comfortable with them. Then they decided to record Unborn Child. It was 1974, just over a year after Roe v. Wade. The song was an explicit anti-abortion statement addressed to a fetus asking to be allowed to live. Warner Brothers reportedly urged the duo not to release it. They released it anyway. Concerts were picketed. Pro-choice activists organized against them. Many radio stations refused to add the song. The duo later said the controversy effectively halted their commercial momentum for years. The song exists now as an artifact of a debate that did not end. But in 1974, a soft pop duo with a comfortable following had walked directly into the most charged domestic political argument of the decade, and their career absorbed the impact. The audience that had bought Summer Breeze found themselves sorting out whether they still wanted to follow the band into this new territory. Many of them decided they did not. John Lennon recorded Cold Turkey in 1969, and its chart life ran into 1970. The song was not a metaphor or an allegory. It was a direct, uncomfortable account of heroin withdrawal, described in real time, with screamed vocals over a raw guitar track. Cold Turkey never appeared on a Beatles record. Lennon had offered it to the group and they passed. He released it as a solo single, and many top 40 stations handled it the way they handled anything that felt like it was asking too much of a listener. They avoided it, not with a formal ban in most cases, just a quiet decision not to add it to rotation. Its chart performance was limited compared to Lennon's name recognition, partly because programmers kept it at a distance. What the song actually was, historically, was one of the most honest accounts of addiction ever recorded on a major label. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't cautionary in any comfortable sense. It simply described what it felt like, and that description was apparently more than most stations were willing to broadcast.
Me in my Chevy van, and that's all right with me.
Chevy Van by Sammy Johns was released in 1973 and charted strongly in 1974 and 1975. It describes, with some specificity, picking up a hitchhiker, spending time with her in the back of a van, and then letting her out to continue on her way. Van culture in the 1970s was real. The culture had its own magazines, its own aesthetics, and its own unspoken reputation. Johns had simply set the experience to a mid-tempo country rock melody. Some conservative markets handled the song with caution, others played it freely.
Me in my Chevy van, and that's all right with
The difference often came down to whether the program director had been paying attention to the lyrics or simply to the genre. Country-flavored rock existed in a different censorship zone than pop or soul, and a song that would have drawn immediate attention in one format could slip through in another. The song later became a cultural shorthand for a very specific moment in American automotive leisure history. At the time, it was soft censored by stations that were keeping an eye on what their advertisers might think. Loretta Lynn had already made a career of songs that went places country radio would rather have avoided. She had not arrived gently. The Pill, released in 1975, was something different. It wasn't about jealousy or hardship or perseverance. It was about birth control. The narrator tells her husband that she is done being a baby factory. She has found a solution. The tone is matter of fact. She is not asking for permission. Many country stations banned it. The controversy slowed its chart progress considerably, keeping it from peaks that its audience support might otherwise have produced. Lynn later said she received letters from women across the rural South who told her the song described their own lives. The very listeners targeted by those radio bans had been requesting it by phone. Stations in some markets were refusing to play a record that their own audience was calling in to hear. The distance between the gatekeepers and the audience they believed they were protecting had rarely been more visible. The Rolling Stones had been testing radio's limits since the mid-1960s. By 1973, they had developed a reliable method. Go further than anyone expects, then negotiate from there. The track, originally titled Star described sexual encounters with a groupie in graphic terms. Atlantic Records, which distributed the Stones in the United States, required the band to rename it. The album version became Star Star. The title changed. The chorus did not. It still screamed the original word, plainly, repeatedly, across every pressing. The BBC banned it outright for obscene lyrics. Many American stations refused to add it regardless of the printed title. The gap between what the song was called and what it actually said was so obvious that the retitling functioned less as a fix and more as a formal acknowledgement that everyone knew exactly what was happening. On the 1975 North American tour, the Stones performed it with a giant inflatable phallus on stage. Whatever symbolic distance the rename had created was gone. What the 1970s produced across all of this was not a generation that had been protected from difficult content. It produced a generation that knew exactly which songs they weren't supposed to hear, and had heard all of them anyway. The music that drew the most organized resistance, the most formal banning, the most pressure from political figures and crime commissions and church groups and parent organizations is also the music most likely to be remembered. Not because controversy equals quality, but because the act of restriction confirms that something is worth finding. Every song on this list was, in some way, a door someone tried to close. None of them stayed closed. Which one do you remember hearing when you weren't supposed to? Let me know in the comments. We love to hear from you. Be sure to subscribe and stay with us for more of this kind of history. And check out this video next. Thanks for watching.